Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of First Samuel and now in verse 14. If you recall, yesterday we had Saul who joined the band of prophets to prophesy, and I indicated that it is really very much a divine impulse to sing praises to God with the harp and the lyre and the cymbals and the musical instruments. And you do find that in First Chronicles chapter 25 as well, and in First Samuel chapter 19. Now, after that episode was over, he goes home. And in verse 14, he speaks to Saul's uncle. And the uncle said to him and his servant. Now, in Hebrew, I think we can learn a new word. And this is dot. This word is dot. And dot actually means, how should I say, beloved, someone you love, right? Uh, or the father's brother. And so in this case, uncle. And so that's quite a broad perspective of the word itself, but within the context, it would be uncle. So Saul's uncle, Saul's father's brother, Kish brother, said to him and his servants, "Where did you go?" And Saul said, "To look for the donkeys or the she donkeys. When we saw that they could not be found, we went to Samuel," right? Shemuel. And Saul's uncle said, "Please tell me what Samuel said to you." And Saul said to his uncle, "He told us plainly." The word plainly is basically, how should we say? He he caused it to be made known, right? Caused to be made known. I guess you can say clearly. And then continue on that the she donkeys had been found. Now, this next statement is interesting because it says Saul, did not tell him about the matter of the kingdom which Samuel had mentioned. It is not public knowledge, and it tells us that he knows to keep a secret. So he knows what to say and what not to say. And at this point in time, talking about it would be detrimental, I guess. And so moving on to verse 17. Verse 17 onwards to the end of the chapter describes how Saul was chosen in public to be the king of Israel. Verse 17, thereafter Samuel called the people together to the Lord at Mizpah. Now understand this, to the Lord. They actually gathered together towards God or regarding God. I guess you could use the word towards or regarding. And so what this means is they are all gathering, and the purpose of this gathering is because of God. That would be a better way to understand it. And so the people gathered together because of God at Mizpah. Verse 18, and he, this is Samuel, said to the sons of Israel. Now, this is important because Samuel is now taking the official spokesperson for God. And you notice The way he speaks parallels what Moses speaks. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I brought Israel up from Egypt. Now understand, up literally to higher terrain. What it means is, if you look at the geographical terrain, Egypt is lower in its terrain than Canaan. And so you always talk about going down to Egypt and then going up to Canaan. And so in this case, it's going up from Egypt to Canaan. And I delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the power of all the kingdoms that were oppressing you. What does that mean? First, the hand of Egyptians, we know the crossing of the Red Sea. The power of all the kingdoms, these were the Canaanites, right? Canaanites. The Amorites. And these were the ones who were fighting them. And so they are saying that these are the ones who oppress you, who press down against you. So they had to cross the Jordan and fight all these battles to win over, I guess, about 30 odd cities. And these were the power of the kingdoms that were oppressing them because they wouldn't allow Israel to come in. This is a recollection of what God did for Israel since the days of Egypt. But you have today, 19 is important. This day, you have rejected your God. Now let's understand this. Your God is Elohim. The word rejected would be to, I guess you could say, to refuse, right? To refuse. To refuse your God who has delivered you from all your calamities and distresses. And you have refused him. You have, I guess you could say you have decided not to have God and said that no, but set a king over us. You want a human king. And this is what has been said earlier on, right? Earlier on in 1 Samuel chapter, I guess you could say chapter, let's see, chapter 8, verse 7 is the beginning of this idea. It's consistently using this word rejected to spurn. What else can you say? To refuse to have God. In fact, by refusing Samuel, that would be tantamount of saying they prefer somebody else, a king like everybody else. And so now that the reason is clear, now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your clans. And this is the selection of the king. This is selection, and it always goes by tribes and then by clan and then by family, right? By tribe, by clan, by family, and then by individual. Now, these processes is to show in public that God has chosen. And so what is happening here is you would see that thus Samuel brought all the tribes of Israel near, All means all 12 tribes, right? When you talk about 12 tribes, it excludes Levi. He can't be king, right? Levi cannot be king. And the tribe of Benjamin was taken. Now, this is important. Verse 20, uh, this really means seized, uh, taken by lot. And so you need to understand that there is a casting of lots, and Samuel will pick. And so here, when Samuel picked, he picked Benjamin. And so the tribe was cleared, right? The tribe was cleared. In verse 21, after the tribe of Benjamin was selected, then he brought the tribe of Benjamin near by his families. So now we're talking about this piece here. The clans and the families. And in this family, the Metrite or Matri, the Metrite family was taken. And this is a lot picked. Next would be the individual. And Saul, the son of Kish, was taken. Again, understand the lot picked. But when they looked for him, he could not be found. They didn't know where he was. Verse 22. Therefore, they inquired further of the Lord. Now, this is important. Verse 22. This is asking for the Lord. Inquire, ask, ask for a favor. And so this inquired further is to ask of God, has the man come here yet? The expression is, how should we say, has the man arrived here? Actually, what is important is the word here. Is the man here? And so the Lord said, look, he is hiding himself by the baggage. Now, this word hiding, I guess you could actually think of this as withdrawing himself. Essentially is to, and the word to go away and to hide, and the word baggage is important. This word here doesn't really mean baggage. I think this word really means article, right? Article, objects. What else can you say? Vessels. Now, I think what might happen in the Jewish mind, so I can tell you what the Jewish mind thinks about this. Now, if you are aware, in the possession of the high priest, you've got the Urim and Tumim. The rocks that are casted for directions, right? For directions that a high priest use. And this Urim and Tumim is perhaps what Saul was standing by, because he wasn't absolutely clear that he is going to be the one without consulting the stones. And so that is the common practice, to make sure that it is clearly God who has approved the selection. Now, that's the whole picture here. He wasn't afraid that somebody would kill him. He wasn't sure that it has cleared God, or was it just Samuel who was talking about it? Now, he wasn't present in the lots being drawn and with his name picked in public that he was going to be king. Because there were a number of situations that we have to think about. Number one, the tribe of Benjamin is not well loved. At the end of the book of Judges, the tribe of Benjamin was almost completely destroyed for something vile that happened. And because of that, a person coming from the tribe of Benjamin is not really somebody that everyone would be totally elated with. And Saul knew. And so Saul wanted confirmation, perhaps using the Urim and Thummim to seek God's approval. Now, moving on to verse 23. And so they ran and took him from there. The idea is to fetch him, right? To fetch him. And when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulders upward. Now, what does this mean? So, if these were the people around, right? They're about the same height, perhaps. And if Saul was to stand around, he would be standing tall. Basically, his shoulders and head is above everyone else. And when you look at the crowd, you cannot miss Saul. Verse 24. And so Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen?" Now understand this word chosen. The word chosen is to elect, right? It is to decide. And it is really to select from many and then decide one of them. And so the appointment or the choosing of Saul is not arbitrary. There were decision factors that God would use to choose. And it is not by whims and fancy. And so in this, Samuel said, "Surely there is no one like him among all the people." And this was a physical appearance, that Saul was taller than everyone, shoulders up. And as Saul was chosen by God, and of course, they know that Saul is chosen by God because of what Samuel said. So you got to trust Samuel's words for this. And they know that even Samuel would have to be subservient to the king. But there are two roles in the nation, the function of the king and the function of the prophet, both of which are ulterior or ultimately very important. The king needs to respect what the prophet says. The prophet needs to respect the authority of the king. And so all the people shouted and said, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Now, you must note that the word long is in italics. It does not exist. And so the idea here is the king. Be alive. Right? Be alive. And ... and continue to be alive. So long live the king is a modern way of expressing it. The king be alive and continue to live. And so Usually, these are words that are repeated to kings. The Chinese emperors have similar expressions. Eh? 万岁, 万岁, 万万岁, or 万岁, 万岁, 万万岁. These are Chinese words that says that the king may he have 10,000 years to live. And so this Hebrew expression, the king be alive and continue to live, is long live the king in English, that the king has a long life, basically. Now, this is typical tradition of any king. They want the king to continue, and this would be the similar expression. Similar expression. Now, we come towards the end of chapter 10, and there are a couple of challenges right now. In chapter 10, verse 25, then Samuel told the people the ordinances of the kingdom. The word the ordinances of the kingdom refers to the, well, in English, we can say the justice of the kingdom, right? These would be the process of the kingdom and what the kingdom requires to follow. That these would be the ordinances, these will be the rights, these will be the privileges. And we'll read of that soon enough. In fact, we will read this. I guess you could find this. I guess you can find this in chapter 11, right? In chapter 11 and 12, particularly in chapter 12. These are listed so that God once again wants the people to be fully aware, very fully aware, that by electing a king, by having a king in a kingdom, not God's kingdom, but in the kingdom where man is the ruler, it is iterated such that Samuel Downs writes it down in verse 25. So in this case, he writes them down in the book and he placed it before God. And Samuel sent all the people away, each one to his house. Remember, we saw this in chapter 9, that they wanted to have a king. God says, fine, then all go back. Now that the king was introduced with the ordinances, all go back. And verse 26 says, Saul went back to his house at Givata, right? Givata, the Gibeah. And the valiant men whose hearts God had touched went with him. Now, what do you mean valiant? This word is an important word. These words are men of strength. As Saul already is a man of strength, these are men of valor. They are the heroes, right? These are the, well, if you like, bodyguards or army, the soldiers that will fight with Saul. And so you find that whenever a king, right, a king is selected, then his men would be with him. And so these are the men strong to protect him and to support what he wants done. And these are also the men, the one whose heart that God touched. Now, this is a word that is said that that God had, how should we say, that God had reached, that God had Well, touch is good. Uh, because the word is naga. Naga is really to strike, to touch, uh, to stretch out, to touch. I think that would be a possible way of looking at it. That God is said to have affected these men, which tells us that God didn't do it to every one of them, but it seems that God chose them for the protection of Saul. But the surprising thing is in verse 27. But certain worthless men. Now, this idea of worthless literally is worthless. Um, it is good for nothing. So, in God's eyes, they are good for nothing. They are evil. They do things that is wrong before God. They are ungodly. They are like Belial, right? Like the devil, the name for the devil. They are wicked. Now, all these are not very nice words to describe these bunch of individuals, and they are considered worthless because God cannot use them. God can use these men of valor, of strength, to be the army and the soldier of Saul. But these other men, you can't depend on them. They are good for nothing because God finds them that they can't be used for God's purposes. But look at what they say. This is what they say. How can this one deliver us? Now we need to understand deliver here is to cause to save. Said, how can this Benjamite be victorious in battle? How can this Benjamite come and deliver or save them from the Philistines? Now understand, the Philistines is a perennial enemy, and the Philistines is now positioning certain officials inside Judea. And so they despised him. Now, this word despised is very important, and we will touch on this. Despised him and did not bring him any gifts. Any gifts. But he, Saul, kept silent. So let us break this down. The word despise means to disregard Saul, consider him uh, worthless. When these people in the eyes of God are considered worthless by God, these worthless men consider Saul, the chosen one of God, as someone who is useless, don't want to listen to him, disregard him, despise him, treat him with contempt, do not consider him a king at all. And the way that they had shown this is by not bringing a gift. Not bringing a gift. So look at this. These are the words. This is an A, this is a B. When you bring gifts, you respect him. When you don't bring gifts, you despise him. You disregard Saul. And so they disregarded Saul. Now, finally, the next one here is, and then Saul kept silent. This is about keeping quiet. keeping quiet, pretend to be deaf. I guess you could say that, right? In the earlier part of this chapter, Saul has to wait 7 days for Samuel so that he understands uh, the role of the prophet, and that the king needs to wait upon the prophet, and the prophet communicates with God to inform the king what to do. And so, thereby, that waiting is to teach Saul that there is a difference between king and prophet. In this case, in verse 27, these worthless men considered Saul worthless. And so Saul kept silent, he kept quiet, he pretended to be deaf, that he is not going to react. And in this case, he learned to be patient. He has learned that he cannot please everyone all the time. He has learned that there will be some people, some of the time, that will not be happy with him. And when they are not happy with him, they can be very unhappy with Saul. And so Saul is beginning to see how the children of Israel rally together, and this becomes a problem. Because if they can be against you day one, they will be against you in day 10. Because their minds would not change. In fact, it could get worse. And so he needs to be prepared for human intervention and human problems. Choosing someone to be king, God sees a lot of problems, lots of downside. Of course, there are some good sides, but by and large, a lot of downsides. But the people can't tell. And the people really desperately want a king. And by rejecting God or despising God as their king in a theocracy, that is what it is. A theocracy is where God is king, right? Now we have a royalty where man is king. And so God needs to ensure that this aspect is always on top of the man king. And by doing that, puts in the process, the procedures, the ordinances, wrote them in the book. Now, the book would be the book of ordinances that the kingdom will have as a human king takes shape and form within the newly formed kingdom, right? Newly formed kingdom. And by kingdom, we would mean the king office, the office of the king. And the office of the king has the book of rules and rights and privileges, so that they understand that the king has power to do many things, even disregarding God. And when God punishes the people, God is also punishing the king. And it spills over to the people. And that is what God is trying to communicate to the people. And now that you have a king, be aware that there are many, many challenges down the road. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.